Jaffer, founder and executive director of the National Security Institute. Jamil, it's always good to see you. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Natasha.
So China says that U.S. and our allies provoking Beijing with these exercises near Taiwan. There were certainly strong words aimed at the U.S. over the weekend. Do you think the U.S. is exacerbating the situation with these exercises, or are they truly necessary?
These exercises are completely necessary, and they're standard, Natasha. The U.S., for decades around the globe, including in the Taiwan Straits, but elsewhere as well, has conducted what are called freedom of navigation exercises. These are exercises demonstrating that U.S. destroyers, U.S. naval vessels, and civilian ships can transit any international body of water with permission under international law. And so it's important to do these exercises so we can ensure that the huge amount of goods that flows through the South China Sea and the Taiwan Straits is allowed to flow continuously without interference, like what we saw today or yesterday from this Chinese naval vessel.
You know, Chinese defense minister said that a conflict with the U.S. would be, quote, unbearable disaster. Can you elaborate what that could look like for the U.S. and how it would affect everyday Americans?
Well, look, I think it's certainly true that a conflict with the Chinese would be disastrous for both nations involved and would be hugely problematic. Nobody wants that. There's about $3 to $5 trillion of trade that goes through the South China Sea, a significant portion of that between our allies and China and between us and China. And so it's important that we not get in a conflict. At the same time, it's the Chinese naval vessel that cut off a perfectly acceptable freedom of navigation exercise. It's the same thing that happened just about a week ago, where we had a U.S. reconnaissance plane flying over international waters, intercepted by a Chinese J-16 jet, conducting very dangerous maneuvers in front of it. So this is the Chinese raising tensions, not the United States. We're conducting normal operations in international airspace and international waters.
You know, some Republicans right now are criticizing the Biden administration for trying to have meetings with Chinese officials. Do you think that criticism is fair? And what should the Biden administration be doing that they're not doing right now?
Well, look, at a minimum, the Biden administration should continue to keep the pressure up on China. They've done so by conducting these freedom of navigation exercises. At the same time, there is some discussion about lightening up sanctions on certain leaders in China, including potentially the defense minister who was sanctioned back in 2018. I think congressional Republicans are right to say, look, we don't want to reduce pressure on China. At the same time, it does make sense to have bilateral dialogue. President Reagan did that with the Soviets in the 1980s. There's nothing wrong with that. But again, we have to be very realistic about what we can and cannot work with China on. This idea somehow that we can cooperate with them on climate change, but also confront them on other areas is simply not realistic. The reality is that we need to look at China for what it is, which unfortunately today, the Chinese Communist Party, an adversary.
Okay. Jamil, Jaffer, always appreciate your time. Thanks so much for joining us. And
Thanks,
presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. will take part in a discussion on Twitter Spaces. This after Instagram temporarily blocked his campaign account. Now, Kennedy is running for president as a Democrat. Elon Musk invited him to speak after Instagram said no.